Great to be joined again by the Executive Director of ABARES, Dr. Jared Greenville. Jared, how are you today?
Oh, very well, thank you, and thanks very much for having me back on.
Yes, we're excited to see this report simply because it does create a tantalising scenario in a broader context. But first of all, let's just look at this report. What's the title of it and what is it saying?
Yeah, so it's a report that's looked at the role that global distortions like subsidies and tariffs have played in terms of their impact on food security, emissions, and also economic development. We've called it emissions, agriculture support, and food security. And what we've tried to look at is, whether there can be changes globally that could help the food system and agriculture deliver on the things it needs to deliver on, and that's feeding people, providing incomes to producers, but also, its impact on the environment.
Now, when you talk about the environmental impact of these policies, these protection policies for farmers, what sort of inefficient farming systems are we talking about? Is it like deforestation, for instance?
Yeah, they can have a whole range of different impacts. So effectively, these things promote agriculture where, it might not otherwise occur. And so it can include things like extra land use in agriculture, which, will lead to deforestation, but also things like overuse of fertilisers and other chemical inputs. And because there's no real, price response from producers to ration their use, they often overuse this. And that can lead to higher emissions, but also other environmental impacts. It can also mean that people are grazing more cattle in areas which is not really worth having cattle, and they'll have an impact on methane emissions. So there's a whole range of different kind of behavioural changes that you can get out of the current system.
All right, and when it comes to this debate, I guess, when it comes to protectionist policies like the ones you're talking about, Australia in the global rankings, in your analysis, is much less protectionist than, I guess, other countries are?
Yeah, we have some of the lowest levels of what we'd call kind of protectionist support. Us and New Zealand really stand out across the OECD countries, but also when we compare ourselves to other emerging major agriculture producers. And so what we've really done is strike a competitive kind of path in global markets where our producers respond to what consumers want. And it also means that they respond to the environment as well and don't overuse fertilisers and other kind of inputs because it's really just uneconomic to do so.
I guess these things would be hard to push through. I mean, sometimes climate change-related policies in agriculture, as we've seen in Europe, are hard to push through in some sectors. But I know in India they tried to reform land ownership laws there, and there were massive protests and big problems for the government there. Is it difficult for, I guess, governments in emerging economies to get these sort of more free trade-directed policies through to remove subsidies?
Yeah, it is. And it's quite often the case, as you say, that there's what we sometimes call a structural change or changes that have to occur as a result, which are difficult for communities and for producers and the like. But often in developing countries, it's not that or emerging countries, it's not that the agriculture sector is uncompetitive. It might be competitive in different aspects compared to where the support is directed. And there's a whole range of historical reasons why countries support some products more than others. And so often it's a matter of doing some other kind of agricultural activity rather than having to leave the land altogether. And so it's about trying to, in a global sense, trying to create opportunities as well as that adjustment that's needed.
In the macro sense, what I find tantalising about the proposition is a sort of a triple tick, if you like, you've put forward here. There was the, removal of subsidies, the environmental benefits, but it does appear that it would put some uncommon political bedfellows together in the forms of those that support free trade and those that support dramatic action on climate change.
Yeah, that's right. So what we've pointed out really is that you can tick all the boxes, so to speak, by, freeing up global agricultural markets. And that has a number of outcomes. It not only does it, promote food production, so it helps food security, it reduces the prices that consumers pay for food on average. It improves the prices that producers receive. But importantly, it has these other environmental impacts. And we're focused here on emissions, and it can reduce global emissions from agriculture by about 1%.
And I guess lastly with this report, it probably steers around, I obviously haven't read it yet, it's only just come out today, but it steers around, I guess, the discussion of global conflicts like Ukraine and Russia and looks more long-term at the benefits of trade policies and removing subsidies.
Yeah, it does. It is definitely a longer-term look at how things could change in the location of food and so forth production. But one thing I'll just, comment on that, and, we are in a situation where, a conflict in one part of the world is really significantly impacting global food markets. But overall, history has really shown us that, trade is much less volatile than domestic production systems. And while we might have unexpected impacts from things like wars in one part of the region, but when we think about the hedge benefit or the decreasing volatility that trade has from normal kind of weather events and the like around the world, it's quite a beneficial aspect. So there's multiple things we have to weigh off. But overall, we think that it can also reduce, and we've done some other work to say that it can reduce some of the risks, not only the absolute gains that we've talked about in this report.
So I imagine, are you getting at the point that maybe the more, let's say, agile that trade markets are, the more able they are to adjust to dramatic and adverse climatic conditions?
Yeah, and that's exactly right. And if you think about it, if there were no borders around the world, you would produce food where it's most efficient and responsive to do so. And trade's kind of trying to get at that, trying to allow production to occur where it is most agile and most efficient. And that's the kind of case that we would get if we didn't have any borders.
Well, Jared Greenville, the Executive Director at ABS, thanks so much for joining us on the release of this report today. Much appreciated.
Excellent. Thanks again for having me on.